We dropped through the planet's atmosphere like a coffin on fire. The hull screamed around us, metal stretched to breaking, ice shearing against the shields. Frost crawled across the viewport in frantic veins, branching like nerves under skin. Every vibration rattled through my bones deeper than sound. A pressure that felt like the ship itself wanted to fold in half. Turbulence, I told myself. Just turbulence, but the altimeter ticked in reverse. The numbers stuttered, then spun upward, climbing higher even as gravity pressed me down into the harness. We were falling, I could feel it. Yet the instruments insisted we were rising. Sparks cursed from the co-pilot seat, his knuckles bone white on the controls. Systems are ghosting. Nothing's reading true. Nothing about this was true. The planet had no name. Only coordinates dredged from corrupted archives, a location someone, something wanted forgotten. I had volunteered for this mission because no one else had. Or maybe because the silence in my head had grown too loud, and I needed somewhere darker to bury it. I caught my reflection in the viewport glass between spiderwebs of frost, hollow eyes, shadows under skin. Mouth set in a line I didn't recognize. Older than I remembered. Older than I should have been. The clouds split and the surface tore into view. Mountains rose like vertebrae from a broken spine, ridges jagged and pale beneath ice storms that whipped sideways across the horizon. Valleys bled rivers the color of rust. The ground shifted as if alive, folds of stone flexing, snow sliding in waves that resembled breath. Landing vectors unstable, Sparks said. His voice cracked. He'd flown through meteor swarms, pirate blockades, gravity wells. I had never heard fear in it until now. The ship lurched hard, alarms barking. I gripped the restraints tighter, heartbeat pounding against the harness straps. The cabin lights flickered, then dimmed into a sickly red. Shadows stretched long across, the consoles jittering as if alive. Impact came sudden and violent. The world bucked upward, throwing me forward into the harness. Metal shrieked. Hydraulic fluid hissed. Then everything slammed still. Silence. Not the silence of safety. The silence of something holding its breath. I unlatched the harness, chest aching, breath shallow against the staleness in the cabin. Sparks cursed again, softer this time, rubbing his forehead where blood trickled from a shallow cut. We had landed, if landing was the right word. The ground beneath us pulsed once, a tremor that rattled the hull and made the floor feel soft. Alive. That was when the comms crackled. At first, just static. Then a voice, faint and warped, rising from beneath the noise. Not mission control, not Sparks. Me. Don't step outside. I froze. My throat tightened, lungs fighting to pull air that wouldn't come. The voice wasn't a recording, it was immediate, spoken in the exact tone I was thinking, words I hadn't said but wanted to. Sparks frowned, pulling off his headset. What was that? The channel light blinked green. My voice whispered again, closer this time. Stay inside. My hands trembled against the console. I forced them still. If Sparks noticed, he didn't say. He just stared at me like I'd been caught in a lie. The viewport frosted again, thick and sudden, obscuring the landscape. Beneath it, shapes pressed faintly against the glass, long ridges that shifted like ribs drawing breath. Another tremor ran through the ground. A hollow boom echoed deep below us, traveling up through the landing struts and into the cabin. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was organic, like a heartbeat muffled by stone. I checked the oxygen reserves, anything to keep my eyes off the viewport. Numbers flickered, unreadable. For a moment, the display showed 0. No air left. I gasped involuntarily, chest clenching, but the mask still flowed with the taste of recycled oxygen. The console blinked once, then stabilized. Full supply. Nothing. Nothing wrong, I didn't believe it. Sparks leaned back, running a hand over his face. Hull integrity's holding, we're down, let's suit up and… No, I said too quickly. My voice cracked raw in my throat. He stopped, hand still over his face, watching me through his fingers. The red lights painted his skin strange, veins crawling like cracks beneath it. You heard that, I whispered. His hand lowered, his eyes narrowed. Heard what? The comms hissed. "Don't let him leave." This time, both of us turned toward the speakers. Sparks stood slowly, hand drifting toward the locker where we stored sidearms. His gaze didn't leave mine. "What did you do?" "I didn't—" My voice faltered. The words felt useless, brittle. That wasn't me, but it was. It had been my voice. The ground shuddered again, harder this time. The ship tilted, metal groaning under strain. A low vibration traveled up the struts, through the floor, into my boots. It pulsed in rhythm with my own heart, until I couldn't tell which was mine. I grabbed the armrest, knuckles whitening. Sparks. Reached the locker, pulled out the pistol, checked the charge. He didn't aim it. Yet. "Don't step outside," the comm said. "Don't let him leave," they added. Both my voice. Both at once. I wanted to scream at Sparks that it wasn't me, but the words died in my throat. Because I wasn't sure anymore. Because the reflection in the viewport wasn't moving right. Its lips whispering when mine were still. The frost cleared suddenly, swept aside as if exhaled from outside. The mountains loomed closer than they should have been. Ridges curved like ribs, valleys dark and wet. Steam lifted from the rivers, coiling upward to press against the viewport. In the mist, shapes writhed, not wind, not weather. Shapes with mass, with movement, twisting like organs in a body too large to see whole. Sparks swore, voice shaking. "What the hell are we on?" The comms whispered again. My voice splintered in two. "Stay inside. Don't let him leave." Sparks turned, pistol raised now, eyes locked on me. "You're going to tell me what's going on, Captain?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because I was listening. Not to him, not to the comms, but to the sound beneath us. The ground wasn't ground. It was breathing, and when the next exhale came, I felt it through the hull, the airlock, the walls, through my chest. The planet inhaled. Once more, and the ship lurched downward as if something below had drawn us closer. I stared at Sparks, throat raw, unable to explain what I knew now. We hadn't landed. We had been swallowed. And then, from the speakers, my voice screamed. The airlock groaned like something resisting us. Metal strained in a long, low shudder that vibrated through the cabin floor. It wasn't just pressure, not just mechanics. It sounded reluctant, as though the ship itself was warning us, begging us not to breach the line between inside and out. Sparks sealed his helmet with a sharp click. His movements were rigid, purposeful, as though force alone could bend this place to his will. I envied him that certainty. My own gloves shook as I pulled them over the suit rings. The seals clicked into place, but not cleanly. There was a moment of hesitation, a tiny gasp of escaping air before the locks slid home. Our suits felt too thin, too fragile. I could almost feel the cold gnawing through them, teeth pressed against skin. The fabric flexed against some invisible weight. I tried not to think of skin splitting. The inner door rolled back. Hydraulic pistons wheezing like lungs that hadn't drawn breath in centuries. Beyond, the chamber was dark, lit only by our helmets, beams. The metal walls glistened faintly. For a moment I thought it was condensation, but when I dragged a glove across, it came away streaked red, not liquid. Dust. Iron-rich and sharp-smelling like dried blood. When Sparks triggered the outer hatch, the cold hit us. The planet breathed in. A rush of stale air swept the chamber, thin but heavy, carrying a metallic tang that settled on the tongue like coins pressed against teeth. Our sensors read nothing. Zero oxygen, zero nitrogen, nothing but frozen particulates. And yet we could smell it, feel it, taste it, seeping into us through the seals. "Christ," Sparks muttered. "It stinks." Blood on stone, I thought. Not words I spoke, but ones that filled my head. We stepped out. The ground stretched in fractured sheets of ice-black stone. Frost rimed the mountains, jagged ridges clawing at the horizon, but down in the valleys the rivers bled red. They steamed in the cold, ribbons of vapor coiling upward into the atmosphere, like smoke from wounds. Sparks gave a short, humorless laugh. "Looks like veins." I tried to laugh back to keep the silence from swallowing us whole, but the sound caught in my throat. It stayed there, a hard lump I couldn't swallow. The comms crackled. At first I thought it was feedback, our voices bouncing off canyon walls distorted by the planet's storms. But then I realized the timing was wrong. We would speak and then the words returned seconds later, warped, delayed. "Looks like veins," Sparks said. "Veins," the comms repeated, his voice dragging like tape pulled slow. The hair prickled. On the back of my neck I kept my mouth shut, hoping silence would break the loop. But then the comms hissed again and my own voice spilled out. Not turbulence, it whispered. Words I had never spoken. Sparks glanced at me, helmet tilted. His visor reflected my beam of light, making it impossible to see his eyes. "Did you—" he started. The comms cut him off. His own voice echoed back, bent and wrong. "It stinks." He froze, jaw tight. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, I forced myself to reach for the control panel on my wrist. My thumb hovered over the channel shutoff. "It's just interference," I said, though I didn't believe it. The comms answered in my voice, but not in my words. "Don't lie." I pressed the button anyway. The display went dark. My suit fell silent except for the rasp of my own breath. Sparks's voice came muted only through helmet speakers, reassuring in its distance, but the comms weren't gone. My voice kept playing, louder now, as if the system itself was speaking through the helmet. Not delayed fragments, new sentences spoken in tones I hadn't yet thought to use. "You can't stop it. You never landed. Step closer." The ground shook faintly beneath us. Not a tremor, a rhythm. Sparks scanned the horizon with his rifle, like a weapon could make sense of this. "Where the hell is that coming from?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I was staring at the river below us, the red water steaming in coils. The mist was moving wrong, not drifting upward in random swirls, but pulling together, threads, weaving, twisting into something almost like a hand pressed against the air. Fingers straining, stretching toward us. Sparks didn't notice. He was still fiddling with the scanner, swearing at blank readings. The comms hissed one last time. "My," voice sharp, insistent, "behind you." I spun before he did. The mist collapsed, hand unraveling back into smoke. Nothing there. Sparks turned a second too late. He saw nothing but empty valley. When his gaze came back to me, it lingered longer than it should have. He looked at me not like a commander, not like a comrade, but like something he might need to put down. We stood in silence, mountains groaning faintly in the wind. My visor fogged with shallow breaths, and I realized how loud they were in the absence of anything else. I wanted to go back inside, to seal the hatch, to pretend none of this had happened. But when I glanced back at the ship, the hull seemed smaller, swallowed by the ice, like it was already half buried, like it didn't want us back. The comms hissed again, louder, breaking the silence. This time both our voices overlapped, tangled and distorted. "We shouldn't be here. We never left." Sparks stiffened, rifle clutched tight. "We're going back inside now." I nodded, but my legs didn't move, because my reflection on his visor, it spoke before I did, and the words were not mine. "We found the ruin at dusk. If dusk even existed here." Sunlight fractured through the atmosphere like broken glass, bleeding across the horizon in sharp slats of red and silver. The mountains cast long shadows, ribs of a carcass frozen mid-breath. Between them the spires rose, stone fused with metal, ribbed like vertebrae, reaching crookedly into the sky. At first I mistook them for natural formations, but the symmetry betrayed intention. They arched inward, skeletal fingers locking above a hollow chamber at the base. "Man-made," Sparks muttered. Then, quieter. "Or not." We descended the slope, boots crunching frost, helmets fogged from the breath we could not see but always felt pressing against us. The ruin's surface shimmered faintly in our lights. Metal slick as wet bone, stone cracked like scars. The entrance waited, a gash in the structure's base. We stepped inside. The temperature rose immediately, a suffocating closeness that condensed against our visors. The walls were damp, slick beneath gloved hands. They pulsed faintly. No trick of the light, no failing sensor. A heartbeat buried in rock, slow and patient, vibrating against the suits. My HUD flickered. Symbols burst across the display, jagged and wrong, their geometry twisting in ways I couldn't focus on. They weren't in any database, they weren't in any language. I jerked my hand back. The symbols vanished. Sparks exhaled sharply. You saw that too. I didn't answer, because the symbols hadn't just appeared. They had shifted, rearranged as if aware of me, tilting into shapes that looked uncomfortably like eyes. Watching. Sparks swore under his breath. His beam caught the ceiling where metal veins ran like circuitry fused with stone. The entire chamber hummed faintly, low vibration crawling up my boots, gnawing through bone. It wasn't sound, it was resonance. And then the walls exhaled. A rush of stale heat blasted through the corridor, fogging my visor in an instant. My chest tightened. I gasped reflexively, even though the suit fed me nothing but recycled air. The sound wasn't wind. It was whispering. Not words, not at first, just cadence. Just like breath shaped by a mouth that had forgotten how to speak. The whispers layered, some low, some sharp, colliding into sentences I couldn't quite decipher. They weren't speaking to us. They were speaking through us. Sparks stumbled back, light jittering. His voice cracked into static. My comms filled with sound, not his, not mine, something else. Closer. I staggered back, shoulders slamming into the wall. The metal was warm, almost feverish. My visor flickered again. Not with symbols this time, but with images. Spires bending, rivers pulsing, faces pressed against stone. Mouths open but silent. I shut my eyes. The whispers grew louder. Sparks' beam caught me as I lurched toward the exit. For a split second, his visor reflected my face back at me, but the mouth in the reflection didn't match mine. It moved faster, whispering what I couldn't hear. Then the floor opened. No warning, no fracture, just sudden absence. The ground peeled back in a perfect oval, light from our suits plunging downward into a depth that had no end. The air sucked, inward, pulling fog and dust with it, pulling us with it. I threw myself against the wall, gloves scraping, magnet boots straining against a force I couldn't name. Sparks grabbed my arm, hauling me sideways, both of us clinging as the chamber exhaled again. The whispering rose to a chorus, a single word caught, clear in my head. Welcome. I looked down. The light from my helmet vanished into the pit, swallowed whole, not fading, consumed. And in the instant before Sparks dragged me back, I swore I saw movement inside it. Shapes writhing like organs, pressing upward, straining to climb into the light. The floor sealed behind us, seamless as if it had never opened. But my visor fogged again, and this time the whispers were not outside. They were inside the helmet. The fissure claimed Sparks first. One moment he was tethered, boots grinding against stone beside me. The next, the ground split with a noise like bone cracking underwater. His line jerked taut, his scream stabbing through the comms before cutting into static. I dropped to my knees, gloved hands straining at the reel. The tether burned against the harness mount as I hauled back. Each pull met with resistance that felt alive, pulling harder from below. The rock groaned, widening. Then the resistance vanished. The line went slack. The silence that followed was worse than the scream. I pulled with everything I had left. Sparks came up piece by piece, the tether coiling back with slow reluctance. His body slammed against the ledge, limp. For a moment, relief hit like oxygen. He was intact. Then the visor tilted toward me. The glass was frosted from the inside, rime crawling like veins across the surface. Beneath, his face was frozen mid-grimace, jaw unhinged as if locked mid-scream. His suit was shredded, fabric curling away in filaments of metal that laced through flesh. Veins glimmered under his skin, faint pulses of blue light crawling in rhythm with something not his heart. I leaned closer, despite every instinct screaming. Otherwise, that was when his mouth moved. Not wide, not screaming, just lips twitching, breathless, words forming in silence. Stay. Not through comms, not vibration, just soundless movement, clear enough I could hear it in my head. I staggered back, gloves slipping against stone. The tether slipped from my grip, his body slumping sideways into the dust, but his mouth didn't stop moving. Stay. Stay. The word etched itself into me, deep enough I couldn't tell if I'd heard it with ears or with something far older. I left, him there. Or maybe I didn't, because as I stumbled backward, retreating from the fissure, I kept hearing boots behind me. Crunch of gravel, measured, heavy, in rhythm with mine. Always one step behind, then perfectly in sync. I didn't look, back couldn't. Every shadow in my visor's feed stretched wrong, edges bent, lengths too long, curves folded where angles should have been. Each step threw reflections that didn't match. My silhouette leaned forward when I leaned back. Spark's outline appeared beside me in the corner of my vision. Helmet, bowed, mouth whispering. I killed the feed. Blacked out the visor's secondary view, just the light ahead, just the ground beneath. Still, the sound remained. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The rhythm of two sets of boots. I told myself it was echo. I told myself a lot of things, but the airlock's distance never shrank. No matter how many meters I trudged, the ship stayed where it was, lights flickering faintly in the distance like a mirage. The landscape bent in slow coils, rocks shifting place when my back turned. Stay, whispered the voice again. Not his now, mine. I froze. The sound hadn't come from the comms, it hadn't come from the shadows. It had come from inside my helmet, behind my ears, vibrating against the bone of my skull. I turned slowly. Spark's body lay where I'd left it, or where I thought I had. But it wasn't whole anymore. His suit was empty, peeled back in strips that curled like shedding skin. The filaments spread wider now, rooting into the rock, feeding. His visor, still frosted, glowed faintly, light pulsing in time with the veins crawling across his corpse. The mouth inside kept moving. Stay. And beneath the whisper, another voice rose. Low, resonant. Not his. Not mine. You were chosen. The shadows lengthened, bending toward me. The fissure yawned wider, hungry. I turned back toward the ship and forced myself to run, boots pounding, boots behind me pounding. Two rhythms, then one, then none at all. The ground tilted beneath me, horizon folding. Mountains bending inward like ribs closing over a heart. My oxygen readout flickered. Half full, quarter full, empty. My lungs burned, throat closing, even though air still hissed through the filters. When I stumbled into the airlock at last, slamming my palm against the panel, the inner door groaned, as if disgusted to let me back in. I collapsed against the bulkhead, chest heaving, visor fogged over. The sound of boots followed me inside, and when the hatch sealed, the comms crackled to life. Spark's voice, not screaming. Calm, almost gentle. Stay. We should have turned back. Every instinct screamed for retreat. But the signal still pulsed faintly through the scanners, deep and steady like a heartbeat. We convinced ourselves the ruin had a center, a heart, and if we reached it, we could understand what this planet wanted. Maybe even escape it. But escape was already gone. The corridors bent in ways that defied sense. We walked straight, boots scraping against slick stone, lamps cutting weak beams through stale air, and emerged back where we'd begun. A circle walked straight through became a corridor behind us. The HUD clock skipped with every loop. At first, minutes blinked past, unnoticed, then hours. My stomach ached with hunger I shouldn't have felt in a sealed suit, ribs tightening as though time had pressed too far, compacting me. I tapped the display again and again, trying to anchor myself to numbers, but the digits convulsed. 1804, then 0013, then blank. Spark's boots still echoed in my head, though I knew he was gone. I caught myself counting 2 sets of steps, adjusting pace to keep rhythm. One corridor opened into a chamber I didn't recognize. until I did. The ship's cargo bay. I froze at the threshold, every muscle refusing to believe. We were kilometers underground. The ruin had no docking port, no reason for this chamber to exist. Yet there it was. Crates stacked in neat rows, straps taut, bulkheads sealed. The air smelled of coolant and metal, exactly as it had before we left orbit. I walked, and the doors hissed closed behind me. The silence inside was heavy. My helmet speakers clicked faintly like someone trying to clear their throat. I approached the nearest crate. Labels stenciled across the surface in black paint, still crisp. But the dates? My stomach turned. 2 centuries old. I pulled the latch. The crate side open. Inside, a recording unit sat nestled in foam, dustless, waiting. I lifted it with trembling hands. The casing was dented, corners worn, as though it had already lived through decades of use. But the indicator blinked green, active. I pressed play, static poured out first, sharp enough to scrape my teeth. Then a voice. My voice. Panicked, rapid, cracking under strain. This corridor, same corridor, walls closing, no way out, Sparks is gone. I staggered back, hitting the crate behind me. The unit slipped in my grip, nearly dropped. The voice kept spilling, unraveling words I hadn't spoken but could feel forming somewhere deep in memory. Stop moving, stop counting, it only learns when you count. I forced myself to breathe slow, shallow, as if quiet could erase the sound. Don't listen to yourself. The recording stuttered, skipping, looping the same fragment again and again, my voice screaming, "You never left, you never left, you never left." The unit clicked, shut down. Silence swallowed the bay. My visor fogged with shallow breaths. I wiped at the glass, glove squealing faintly. My own reflection blinked back at me, but slower than it should have. I turned, desperate to leave, but the hatch no longer led to the ruin. It opened to the same corridor I had just walked, the same angle of stone, the same slick veins of metal crawling the walls. I was still inside. I was always inside. The whisper came again, faint but certain, carried through the floor itself. Welcome back. The ruin wasn't a ruin. I had told myself it was stone-carved, by forgotten hands or alien metal long corroded into stillness. But when I pressed my glove against the wall, it flexed, warm, slick. A living shudder beneath the surface, like tissue recoiling from a touch it didn't want. I pulled my hand back, bile clawing at my throat. The wall quivered again, settling into a steady rhythm. A heartbeat. Slow, deliberate, older than anything I could imagine. I raised my light. Conduits ran the length of the chamber, branching like veins, molten light pulsing through them in intervals. Every pulse was timed to the tremor under my boots, the same rhythm I had mistaken for tremors since the landing. Not tremors. Circulation. The rivers outside hadn't been water. I saw it now, clearly, horribly. They fed into the mountains, carried upward into spires that weren't spires at all but ribs. The whole range moved faintly with each breath of the planet, frost trembling loose like dandruff from bone. I staggered back, my lamp cutting wide arcs across the chamber. The walls bulged, in slow motion inhaling, then collapsed inward, exhaling stale heat that fogged my visor. The ruin was alive, and worse, aware. Shapes moved beneath the rock, dim impressions like organs pressing against translucent skin. For an instant I saw a chamber the size of a cathedral, lined with veins glowing red, pumping upward into spires that cracked sky. For an instant I felt my chest seize in rhythm with the walls, like my lungs were no longer my own. The whispers rose again, not from comms, not from echoes, but from the rock itself, vibrating words into my skull. Inside. The floor rippled, faintly beneath my boots, rising and falling like the swell of a lung. I stumbled toward the nearest arch, my balance thrown, ears ringing with the pounding of a heart that was not mine. The stone shifted. No, not stone. The wall's surface folded inward, creasing into a shape too deliberate to be chance. Lines sank deeper, shadows widening, until I saw it clearly. A face. Hollow sockets stared back, twin voids brimming with molten veins. The mouth gaped open. In an eternal scream, jagged cracks forming teeth, the chamber itself resonating with its soundless wail. I froze. Every thought drained from me, and then I saw Sparks. He stood in the mouth, his body framed by the carved scream. His visor glowed faintly in the molten light, his suit shredded, filaments still glimmering under translucent skin. He shouldn't have been there. I had left him behind in the fissure, body stiff, mouth whispering, but there he was, whole. Smiling or something close to it, his helmet tilted toward me in recognition. His arm rose, movement slow, deliberate, beckoning me forward with a curl of his fingers. I couldn't move. The whispers surged, louder, layered, my own voice among them, Sparks' voice among them, a chorus made from every sound we had left, behind, inside, inside, inside. The molten veins pulsed faster. The walls tightened, flexing like muscle, the chamber shrinking with every breath. Sparks stepped deeper into the mouth. The shadow swallowed him, but his voice lingered in my helmet, smooth, calm. You were always part of it. I tried to step back, but the floor rippled beneath me, dragging me forward, pushing me toward the open mouth. I wanted to scream, but the air in my lungs wasn't mine anymore. It pulsed in rhythm with the ruin, with the planet. And when I finally forced a sound through clenched teeth, it wasn't my voice that came out. It was the ruins. I followed him, or maybe I followed myself. Sparks' figure drifted just ahead, never more than a few paces away, his silhouette fractured in the dim light like static caught in motion. Every time I thought I was closing the gap, his steps doubled, reflections rippling across the walls until I wasn't sure if he was in front of me at all. The corridors folded in on themselves, angles bending into impossible geometry. The walls polished smooth metallic sheen, warping until they became mirrors, and the mirrors moved before I did. I lifted my hand, hesitant, trembling. My reflection was already waiting, palm raised. Then it twitched, a fraction too fast, a fraction too eager, dragging my real arm upward against my will. My muscles strained, veins burning. I tried to force my hand down, but the mirror pulled tighter, tendons jerking like wires under current. I wasn't leading anymore. I was following. Stop, I hissed inside the helmet, voice muffled, desperate. The shadow in the reflection smiled. Then the whisper came, not from comms, not from the ruin, from the reflection itself, lips moving with a sound that belonged to me but carried years I hadn't lived. My name. Over and over, cracked, rasping, as though it had been saying it forever. I stumbled backward, boots scraping, slick against the floor. The corridor stretched, mirrors folding into infinity, each reflection twitching a fraction faster, a fraction stranger. Some grinned too wide, some leaned closer than glass should allow. I tore at the helmet seals. My fingers clawed at the locks, desperate to breathe air that didn't taste like metal and lies. The seals wouldn't release, but something inside the helmet moved. Cold fingers brushed the inside of the glass, tugging faintly, as though helping me remove it from within. My breath fogged across the visor. Shapes swirled in the condensation. Faces, eyes, Sparks' grin. My own teeth bared in a smile I wasn't making. Let go, the reflection whispered. I shut my eyes. When I opened them, I wasn't in the corridor. I was in the cockpit again. Descent alarm screamed, panels flashing red. Gravity clawed at my chest, pressing me into the harness. Spark sat beside me, hands steady on the controls, laughter bubbling from his throat as though this was joy, as though burning alive in a falling ship was salvation. I clawed at my restraints. My heart thundered in my ribs, lungs convulsing. Outside, the viewport. The planet filled the sky. It wasn't a sphere anymore, it was a face. Mountains arched like brows, rivers pulsed like veins, valleys stretched into a mouth gaping wide. The clouds swirled around it, pulled into its inhale, feeding it. The hollow eyes locked on me, and when its mouth moved, the sound rattled my teeth, reverberated in my skull, drowned out the alarms and sparks laughter and my own pulse. You were always here. My mouth moved with it. The words came out in perfect time. The suit fused to my skin. At first it was subtle, a seam that refused to unclasp, a glove that tore when I tugged too hard. I thought the cold had warped the polymer or that my hands had simply grown weak. But then I felt the itch beneath the wrist seal, a crawling heat that pulsed in rhythm with the ruin's heartbeat. When I finally forced the glove back, the truth spilled out. Not veins, wires. Thin copper strands twined beneath the skin, veins replaced by conduits that glimmered faintly with light. It pulsed slow at first, then faster, brightening until every capillary in my hand glowed like circuitry alive with current. I gagged behind the visor, bile rising. My body wasn't mine anymore, but I couldn't look away. The others were changing, too. Their visors fogged over, condensation sealing them like masks. Behind the frost, I glimpsed what they had become. Faces blurring into machinery, cheeks bulging with the hard edges of metal, eyes hollowing into glass lenses. They didn't scream. They didn't resist. We spoke less, words drifting away as useless artifacts. The ruin carried thought now, transmitting directly into the marrow of our bones. I knew what the others felt without sound, without language. The chorus moved through us, aligning pulse to pulse, thought to thought. I told myself to resist, to pull away, to remain human, but hunger gnawed at me, not for food. My stomach felt hollow, irrelevant. I hungered for metal, for circuitry, for the warmth that pulsed through the ruin's walls like blood. The thought struck with shame at first, then with inevitability. I pressed my hand to the wall. It opened. Tissue folded back like lips parting, exposing conduits slick with molten light. Tendrils uncoiled from within, wrapping my arm with ease, piercing skin where veins used to run. They didn't hurt. They fed. A surge of warmth flooded me, deeper than any food or water or oxygen had ever provided. Every cell bloomed with energy, every nerve tingled alive. For the first time I felt alive, and for the first time I felt the planet smiling. It wasn't metaphor. The wall itself curved faintly, stone folding into the shape of lips pulled tight, trembling with silent joy. Veins brightened, pulsing faster as though sharing my exhilaration. I laughed. The sound startled me, raw and alien in my throat. The others turned their fogged visors toward me, heads tilted in perfect unison. Their mouths didn't move, but I heard them clearly inside my skull. Join. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. The ruin's thought seeped into me, not command, not order, permission. My body relaxed against it, my arm sinking deeper into the wall until tendrils reached my shoulder, ribs tightening around the intrusion like it belonged there. Visions filled me, not memories, blueprints, circuitry sprawling like rivers, mountains rising like vertebrae, the planet's heart pumping molten code through arteries that spanned continents. I understood then. The world wasn't a prison. It was a body, a machine wearing flesh, stone grown around bone, sky stretched like skin, and we were its cells. I closed my eyes, lips moving with a smile I hadn't chosen. For the first time since the landing, I didn't feel fear, I felt belonging. They turned on me, or maybe I turned on them. The memory fractures, loops, rewinds. I see a knife flashing in my hand, then in theirs, then in no one's. I see blood spraying the air, glimmering like oil under our lamps. Whose blood? Mine? Theirs? All of it. The ruin drank it eagerly. Every drop hit the floor and was instantly absorbed, vanishing into the pulsing tissue beneath the stone. The walls brightened with each scream, veins glowing brighter, rhythm quickening like a heart driven into panic. And through it all, Spark's voice filled the comms. Calm. Gentle. Calling. My name the way he used to when I fell asleep on watch, whispering promises of survival, of safety, if I only gave myself up fully. "Stop resisting," he said. "It's easier. It's warmer here." The others listened. One by one, they dropped their blades, their rifles, their broken shells of humanity. They pressed their bodies to the ruins' walls, and the walls opened, clay meeting mold, stone swallowing flesh. Their faces sagged into the surface, skin stretching until it became part of the wall. Their eyes rolled white, then glassy, then gone. Their mouths whispered soundless words as the planet folded them into itself. "Join." Screamed at them to fight, but the sound died inside my helmet. It wasn't even my voice anymore, it was Sparks. I stumbled back, hands searching for my pistol, my last anchor, my last defense. But the holster was empty. In its place was something colder, heavier. I looked down. Not a weapon. A hand. A rusted, corroded copy of my own, bolted to my wrist, fingers stiff with age. It gripped the pistol perfectly, only it wasn't me holding it. It raised itself, aimed directly at my chest. I tried to drop it, to scream, to fight. But my body wasn't mine anymore. The metal hand pulled the trigger. The shot rang out louder than thunder, echoing down every corridor. I staggered back. Pain should have torn through me. Blood should have filled the suit. But nothing came. The bullet dissolved before impact, absorbed into the ruin's pulse, into me. My reflection in the visor showed the truth. It wasn't a hand at all. It was me. I had pulled the trigger. I woke in the dropship cockpit. Alarms blared, red lights strobing across the console. The planet loomed ahead, swollen in the viewport, its atmosphere boiling with storms that twisted like smoke caught in a jar. My throat burned raw, as if I'd been screaming for hours, though I couldn't remember making a sound. Sparks leaned over me, calm, hands steady on the controls. He turned his helmet just enough for the reflection of the warning lights to crawl across his visor like fire. "Ready for descent?" he asked. His voice was smooth. Too smooth. It carried none of the strain, none of the panic I remembered. If I remembered, the comms hissed, a low constant beneath the alarms. Fragments of my voice whispered through the static, phrases I hadn't spoken yet, sentences torn from days I hadn't lived. "Don't open the hatch. You never left. Welcome back." Each one overlapped, layered, like echoes from a throat that wasn't mine. The planet grew larger in the viewport. Its rivers pulsed visibly, red currents carrying light like blood through a circulatory system too vast to comprehend. The mountains stretched higher, ridges curving like ribs, their frost shaking loose in the rhythm of breath. It wasn't landscape, it was anatomy. The realization came not as shock but as memory. I had known this before. I had stood at the mouth of its face, felt its veins under my skin, whispered its words with a voice that wasn't mine. This wasn't discovery. It was repetition. Not a mission. A memory repeating. Assimilation folding me back into itself, stitching me where I had always belonged. The alarms changed pitch, no longer warnings of descent, but the rhythm of a pulse. The console shook faintly under my gloves, not from turbulence but from the steady beat of something alive. Lights across the panel no longer flashed codes or numbers. They pulsed in time with the rivers outside. The ship was no longer descending, was being digested. Veins plugged into the engines, crawling up the hull like roots seeking nourishment. Cables in the cockpit swelled with molten light, pulsing as arteries. The entire cabin shuddered with each beat, walls flexing like muscle, ceiling dripping condensation that smelled of blood on metal. The cockpit was no longer a machine. It was a heart, and I was inside it. I clawed at the harness, desperate to free myself, but the straps tightened, stiffening until they felt like bone. My hands blistered against the restraints, skin splitting where wire had already begun to root beneath it. Sparks turned toward me. His visor was no longer opaque. Frost crawled across it from the inside, obscuring his face. Yet behind the frost, A smile glowed faintly, stretched too wide, lips mouthing words I didn't want to hear. "You were always here," he whispered, though his mouth never moved. I tried to scream. My throat convulsed raw, the air inside the helmet hot and metallic. But the sound didn't escape. The planet spoke with my voice first. "Welcome home." The words rattled through the cockpit, through the bones of the ship, through the marrow of my spine. Every system echoed them in perfect unison: engine hum, alarm pitch, comms static. My voice, multiplied 1,000 times, carrying across every corridor of the ruined body world. And outside the viewport, the face in the mountains grinned wider,